If somebody sins against us, we're supposed to forgive them no matter what. What about verse 15? I want you to look at verse 13. I got away from it there. In verse 13, lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen. We're going to spend probably 2 weeks on that verse, so we're going to take the first part of it tonight. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Now, don't raise hands. I started to others, no, I'm not going to do that. How many of you believe God will sometimes lead folks into temptation? Think about it, but don't raise your hand. Simply because we're going to talk about that a little bit tonight and try to get it a little bit better handled maybe for some of us, me being the first one on the list. First thing I want to mention, first thing, a statement right out of my mouth that I got written down here that I want us to hear, all right? Nobody is above falling into temptation, okay? I don't care who they are. I don't care how godly they seem to be. I don't care how hard they try. Nobody is exempt from the possibility of falling into temptation. I know that you, like I, have seen a lot of high-powered preachers, folks who are well-known, that have fallen into temptations. There's some that I had a lot of confidence in that have fallen into temptation, and I have too. And if you're honest with yourself, you have too. Thankfully, not into some of it to the degree that some have, but we're none of us above or exempt from falling into that temptation in one form or another. I know that, we have people that in our lives we put a lot of confidence in. I was in Nashville one year, back years ago, and we went up to the National Quartet Convention, and I was just all, man, I loving that gospel music, playing it on the radio, and got a chance to go up there to the convention. And Davey and I went up there. What a great time we had. Dave and Melissa went up there with us. We had an opportunity to go backstage. Well, actually, and that day it was down in the basement where they was having the thing. And we got down there, and I came up, and I'm not going to mention the name of the group because I don't want you to, fall out with that group because they're a well-known group. But I couldn't wait to meet them because I've, been familiar with them ever since I was a kid. And there was one of them, boy, he was in there just cussing like a sailor. And I thought, dude, what? It just literally floored me. And I thought, that can't be. But now when I started up there and started talking to him and stuff, of course, all that went away. But it was one of those things that I didn't fall out with him. I know, people have their idiosyncrasies, and he had his, but I was just thinking, man, I couldn't believe that. And then, of course, later on, I came to know a little more about a lot of things, but I wondered why, when I sat down to study this and tried to kind of sort it out in my mind, I've oftentimes wondered about that statement, lead us not into temptation. Does God really lead us into temptation? And if he does, why in the world would he do that to us? Why would it be that, God knows we're susceptible, and God knows it's possible for us to fall into temptation. Why in the world would we need to ask God not to lead us into temptation? And so I started trying first off this morning and this afternoon, trying to figure out, okay, what about that? What does it really mean? So as we look at that, let's look at what God, Christ, is trying to tell us about that. Because to me, that's the key to understanding this rung of the ladder of the Lord's Prayer. Lead us not into temptation. Does it mean that God is the prime mover behind all temptations? Does it mean that temptations come from God? And then I began to read some scriptures. In James chapter 1, verse 13, we studied the book of James. And if you remember there in chapter 1, verse 13, the Bible said, let no one say when he is tempted that I am being tempted by God. God tempts no one. And then I began to understand. I said, okay, now, Lord, that's taken care of because I know. And I've got a handle on that because I really felt like, now, there's no way in the world that God is going to tempt me. But, however, can I be tempted without God's permission? And that truth began to come to me, and I began to understand, hey, wait a minute. There is an unavoidable part of our human existence that we are going to be tempted. Don't you remember what the Lord said, or what the Bible said about the Lord Christ himself? It said he was tempted just like we are, yet he didn't give in to it. All of the old patriarchs of the Old Testament, remember David, Moses, Elijah, remember, they all had times in their life when not only were they tempted, but they did also, likewise as unto all human beings, fall into it. So I began to dig a little deeper. You know me, I like to look it up and say, okay, now what does that word really mean? What is the word that was used here? And the word that's actually used here has two different meanings in the Greek, okay? And the New Testament is written in the Greek. And so when you look at the Greek meaning of that word, there's actually two words there. That word actually occurs 21 times in the New Testament. And out of the 21 times, 20 of those times, it's talking about a testing or a trial. Temptation is not necessarily tempting you to sin, although it is tempting you to sin. It's tempting you to come into the sway of temptation. And God knows, like you know and like I know. I'm step right out on the gangplank here, but now listen, we all know that there are temptations out there that under our own power, under our own spiritual power, as strong as we might think that is, that we on our own cannot withstand it. That something bad will come of it on our own. And so Jesus is leading us to pray. And the reason he's praying is to help us understand, first of all, ourselves, and then also to understand that temptation is going to come. Just as it comes to us, it came to him. Satan came to him more powerfully than he does to any of us, and yet Jesus was able to get around it. Temptation in the wilderness, remember when Jesus was there, it was a lot greater pressure than it is on us, because we know why Jesus came, to seek and save that which was lost. Jesus came to be the power, the awesome power of God to this earth to deliver men from their sins. And Satan, boy, he just said, here's a shortcut. Now that sounds good. We can get there a little quicker. But Jesus knew that if he followed Satan's way, he would himself be destroyed. And so as Jesus again and again and again triumphed over all three of the times that Satan came at him with temptation after temptation after temptation, until finally Jesus was able to walk away. But when you look over the book of Hebrews, in Hebrews chapter 2, verse 10, it says, for it is fitting that he, that is being Jesus, for whom and by whom all things exist, in bringing many sons to glory, should make the founder, the beginner, the builder of their salvation perfect through suffering. How did Jesus prove that temptation can be overcome? He did it by overcoming it himself. Now, if you don't think Jesus was tempted, then listen to what Satan did to Jesus. He offered him every temptation that all you got to do is do this, and the whole plan that you came to earth for is solved. It's all done right then, right there. Because I'll see to it that all of these people that I deal with, Satan deals with, I'll see to it that they know about this, and they'll fall right into your hand. They'll believe in you, which is what Jesus said was necessary. So if you look at the temptations of Jesus, then you got to begin to understand why temptations, as they must come into our life, we must not handle them on our own without the power of God to help us out. But here's what happened to Jesus. Now, Jesus even himself admitted that those temptations in his life helped him. Now, don't go off the deep end, but helped him to grow in performing the ministry that he came to perform. So, because it says it is made perfect through sufferings. Those temptations that Jesus suffered, those temptations that came his way, helped him to develop, helped his plan of our salvation to become more perfect or to become perfect. So what happens to us, and I'm going to try to help me to understand this, but what happens to us is that as we're tempted, we learn a whole lot more about God when we're in the valley than we do when we're on the mountaintop, okay? Because we pay attention a whole lot better when the sufferings come, a whole lot better when the temptations come. The first thing you got to do, it says Jesus is helping us to do here, when he says that we are to pray, lead us not into temptation, he's helping us to understand we've got to, before the temptation comes, okay, before the temptation comes, then we've got to be prepared. We've got to be prayed up. We've got to be ready. We've got to recognize where our power, our strength is going to come from when we walk into that valley of temptation, when we get into that. And what happens then, it's like a football player. Some of you guys played football. I did a little bit, not a whole lot because it was tough. But football players, you watch them again and again. They run them and they run them and they run them and they knock heads with one another. Why do they do all that? It's no fun, I'll tell you that for a fact. It's no fun. I mean, you run till your lungs feel like they're going to burst and you feel like, but what happens because you do all of that? What happens? You get stronger and stronger and stronger. There's times during that time of suffering, that time of working out, that time of sweat, and that time of banging heads, and that time of going through the practice sessions that you want to quit. A lot of them do. A lot of them do quit. You've seen on the TV sometimes when they're doing interviews with certain football players, they'll talk about how, back last summer's when we got ready to do what we're doing now in the fall, because they were preparing their bodies. They were getting themselves tempered and getting themselves ready to face what they knew they were going to have to face, because they knew that one day in the fourth quarter of a big game, they was going to be so tired they felt like the legs was going to drop off. But here comes the biggest play of the whole game, and you got to rise up and defend against it. And how are you going to do that? Well, you're only going to do it if you've still got enough strength to do it with. And in order to have that, you had to be prepared over and over and over again. That's why in James chapter 1, verse 2, the Bible, James said, "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness." It's when you have over and over faced a temptation after temptation, faced trial after trial after trial, that you grow stronger and stronger and stronger. Conquered temptation is what really builds the muscles of your faith in order to be able to handle the next wave that's going to come at you. Every time you overcome, every time you endure, every time you come out on the other side of a time of suffering or temptation, then you're stronger than you was before you went in, if you overcome. So many times in those times of trials and temptations, so many people will fail. They will fail, and they'll go back to an old life of living separate from God. And all of those times, you see that happen again and again. You're thinking, wow, how could that be possible? And that person, many times, though they may still be saved, if they were saved to begin with, they were when it was over with, but they drag through the rest of their lives, at least weakened, to make it much harder, much harder. When we make it through those sufferings, when we make it through those temptations, we grow stronger. Proper prayer, as Jesus gives it to us here, is to pray to God, Lord, I know up front, I already know. Don't be like Peter. You remember old Peter? Peter, when Jesus was talking about the time of the cross that he was about to go to, and all those disciples, boy, they were just kind of busy murmuring back and forth to one another. Finally, old Peter, boy, he just rose up and said, hey, Lord, I don't know about these other fellas, but I'll be with you no matter what. I'm going to stand by you. I'll be right there, no matter what happens. I don't know about these other boys, but you looking at me, you're looking at a real man. All the rest of them may walk away. They may all forsake you. And here's what he said, I'll never forsake you. Problem, wasn't it? Problem was he wasn't prepared. Jesus told him it was coming. In fact, Jesus even told him, said, oh boy, you're going to deny me 3 times before the rooster even crows. No, sir, Lord, I will not do it. What was he doing? He was depending on his own strength. He was thinking, I'm Peter. I'm strong. I got this. I can handle it. Satan loves that kind of an attitude. When you walk through this world, when you go through the temptations that Satan's got for you, remember this. Satan knows your weaknesses, all right? He knows your weaknesses. He knows right where to hit you, whether it be through suffering or whether it be through temptation to sin. He knows what's going to hurt you the most. And if he can possibly do it, that's exactly where he's going to hit you. You and I, what Jesus is teaching us in his prayer, he's teaching us to be prayed up and prepared. First of all, recognizing I know that's coming. I know suffering's coming. I know temptation to sin is coming. I know it's coming. I don't know what it is. I don't know who it's going to be from or where it's going to hit me, but I promise you it'll be at the most inopportune time, and at your weakest time. But when it comes, I know it's coming. Lord, you help me. Lead us not into temptation. Lead me not into a place where I'm going to fall into that. Lead me not. Does God really do the leading? Does God really cause us to go into those places where we might fall? First of all, God knows it's coming too. God knew it was coming to Jesus. He allowed it to come. He allows it to come into our life, I believe, for that very reason, as the football coach knows how tough it's going to be out there preparing for that big ball game. You're not going to win that national championship game in January if you didn't practice and suffer and hurt and prepare back over there in October, September, August. You got to be ready. You got to be prayed up. You got to be built up. You got to be ready when it happens, not knowing where it's going to happen or how it's going to happen. That's up to God. God, I need you to help me be ready when the big one comes, because here's the rest. Deliver us from evil, okay? There's the key. I need you, Lord. I know temptation is going to come, and I need you to lead me so that when that suffering does come, I need you to deliver me. Deliver me. Deliver me? That word temptation means 2 things I mentioned a minute ago, but it means the temptation to sin, and it means the sufferings that come, which the Bible refers to as themselves causing so many people to yield and to give in when the hard times does come, when the difficulties in the marriage comes. Rather than work through it with God's help, we just give up. When the time comes in the church where somebody's mistreating you and you just feel like it's so awful and terrible and bad, just give up, just walk away. When the preacher doesn't treat you like you think he ought to, or he says something you don't like, just rather than lean on God and work it through, just go ahead and give up and just walk away. God is telling us we need to be strong. We need to be prepared. We need to let him be in charge so that he can bring us through on the other side, deliver us from, and basically of all the things that I read concerning this verse today, it really means deliver us from the evil one, meaning Satan himself. Imagine, if you will, what's going on in our world today. So many people today have come up with all this, started out many years ago as being just kind of jokes, making jokes about Satan, making jokes about the devil, giving him the old pitchfork and the forked tail and all that stuff and making him look kind of funny and goofy. He is nothing like that. Nothing like that. Others then, they kind of began to develop this whole thing of Satan being, rather than a person, rather than being something, somebody, they made him up to be some cosmic force, just an evil atmosphere kind of thing, which that is definitely not true. Satan is a very real person. He is very real in his tactics and what he plans to do. He is more organized than any army on earth. He has demons who are at his disposal. He has trained them. They have watched you. They've seen every move you've ever made. Not Satan personally. He is not like God. Now, don't get me wrong. He is not omnipresent, which means everywhere all the time. He is one. He is one. But he has thousands of demons all over the face of this old earth. And he assigns some to you too. And when he wants to, when he pulls their chain, they respond. They go. And they were prepared. They prepared to take you down because Satan has told them so. Our world, our society has tried so hard to make him look so different to what he really is. The Bible tells us he is beautiful. He is beautiful. And he has pipes that are absolutely the most sweetest sounding music you've ever heard. And he uses it. He uses it to entice people, to draw people in. That's why he can take it and destroy the life of our young people through music, through horrifying music that you and I, if we don't listen carefully and watch what they're listening to, Satan will draw them in with his pipes, with his great music, his beautiful music. Get a hold of the beat here. I've heard so many people make this statement, and listen to me. Have you ever said this? Yeah, I like that song. I like that song. And then I'd say, well, what's the words? What's this? Oh, I don't know what the words are, but boy, I sure do like that music. I like what it's saying. Listen to what it's saying. Listen to what it's saying. Good example. I remember the other day I was in the dentist's office, and they got the little music playing in the background. It's the old 60s music. Have you ever heard that old song? I had it on the tip of my tongue. Anyway, the name of the song is My Sweet Lord. Do you remember that one? Some of you older folks do. My sweet Lord, hallelujah. Have you ever listened to it carefully? You know what that song is? That song is the chant to the Hare Krishna movement. Identical. I found that out while I was in college because the Hare Krishna people were on campus handing out these pamphlets about Hare Krishna. And one day I heard the song on and I thought, wait a minute. And I picked up their little pamphlet and sure enough, there it was, the little chant of their worship service. My sweet Lord. My sweet Lord, I think is Jesus, don't you? Sure. No, to them it's Hare Krishna, which is, well, I won't go to the description of it, but it's very anti-Christ, anti-God, because they say Hare Krishna is the creation of all things and so forth. So I quickly destroyed that in my library. But my point is, make sure that what you and your children, grandchildren even, are listening to. Listen to the words and see what it's saying, see what it's promoting. Satan is so cunning. He's the same way with movies. How about this? That is a great movie. Man, that thing is great. There's a little cussing in it, but it's all right. It's just a great movie. But it's just like real life, you know. No, it's not. It's not like real life at my house. We don't have that kind of talk at my house. And we're not going to have that kind of nudity running around in the living room at my house. If it's real life to you, then you need to change your life. We need to remember Satan's so cunning, so deceptive. Lead us not into temptation, Lord. Deliver us from the evil one. Help us to see him for what he really is. He's not just some kind of force around out there. No. Remember, behind the temptation, there is a tempter, okay? Look for the catch. There's a hook somewhere. There's a tempter. Behind that lie, there's a liar. Behind what's coming at you, all the death and the bloodshed, there's a murderer who's been a murderer from the beginning. He's a murderer now. He was a liar from the beginning. He's a murderer today. He's a tempter. He's a deceiver. Do you know what the word Satan means? Adversary. He's your adversary. He is anti-God. Anything Jesus has created, he has sought to destroy And that includes you and your family and your children and grandchildren. Satan is a malignancy of evil that is out to destroy you through temptation and suffering. We got to be prepared. That's what God's doing for us. If we say, well, God lead me into temptation, he's not leading you into temptation. But if he's allowing temptation into your life, it's just like when that football coach allows you to run 5 more laps around that football field. He's preparing you. He's strengthening you. He's getting you ready. Satan, the word for adversary, he is your adversary. Never forget it. Prayer, the prayer of Christ that he taught us to pray. That prayer is the foundation of everything that you and I face every day of our lives. And we're praying, first of all, in the beginning of the prayer, we're praying for God's glory. We're praying, Father, you are the Father. You are the great one. You're the Almighty One. We recognize who we're talking to, who he is. Then we begin to say, Lord, help us. Give us our bread. Give us our daily bread. Give us our provisions. But help us, Lord, because we recognize, we know that there is such a thing as Satan, and he is always out to get us, and we need help. 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 14, it says, it's talking about Satan, it says, and no wonder, for even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. So it's no surprise if his servants, that is the demons, also disguise themselves as the servants of righteousness. Verse 15. Their end will correspond to their deeds. Their end will be according to their works. God's going to destroy them eventually. But for now, our faith is being built up and strengthened because God's bringing us through these times of temptation and suffering. So proper praying, Lord, deliver us from the evil one. Deliver us from Satan and his wiles. But we know they're coming. And so because we know they're coming, God, I want you to help me know how to get through it. Help me. Give me the strength. Give me the courage sometimes to stand as a man or a woman of God, that my faith will grow through every temptation that I have to go through. It ought to be a part of every day's prayers. Lord, help me. Whatever's going to come my way. I pray a lot of times, and I hope you do too, but I pray a lot of times as a pastor of the church. I know this church is my responsibility before the Lord. And I pray oftentimes, God, put a hedge around this church. Put a hedge around this church because we need it. I need a hedge around me. I need a hedge around my family. Nothing would make me happier than to know that there was no temptation, no suffering, no problem ever going to come your way. That would make me happy. But you know what? It would also make you soft. It would also make you easy prey for Satan one day when he finally ever did come along. So giving in to the temptations does throw us off track. It does beset us. And many, many, many is the man who's been destroyed because he gave in rather than standing strong with God's help. We need to recognize, first of all, I know it's coming. I know there's going to be times of temptations. If Jesus was tempted, I'm going to be tempted. I'm certainly not above it. But he, through the power of God, was strengthened when he came through them. And his ability to stand through the horrible suffering that was going to be at the cross, he was able to come on through it a whole lot more easily. Lead us not into temptation. Lord, protect us, help us, and deliver us from Satan. Deliver us from the evil one, because we know that victory over Satan and victory over Satan's temptations, victory over Satan's sufferings. Remember what he put old Job through? That came straight from hell, straight from Satan. Why did God allow it? I don't ask him and I don't question him, but I know old Job was strengthened immeasurably because he went through. That means if I have to go through sufferings, and I wear the scars of a lot of suffering in my life, I'll tell you, it strengthens you tremendously. I'm not saying embrace it, but I am saying embrace God. Get closer to God and know that when those times come, you're prepared for God to lead you through. Any questions? Y'all being mighty quiet. Being mighty quiet. All right, let's all stand then. Gotta look at my watch, see, I feel like I'm giving y'all some time. Doug, would you lead us in our closing prayer, brother? Yes. Thank you, Lord. Thank you, Lord. Thank you, Lord. Yes, God. Yeah. Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. Please, God.